welcome to Gefet in the Daf. I'm Yael Shimoni, bringing to you from Yeshivat Risha and Hadran, learning Tosfot and Rashi on the Daf Yomi. And today in our Daf Lamed Aleph and Beit, there's a very, very famous Tosfot that we have to learn together. So this Tosfot deals with questions regarding Eidus. Can an aid send his Eidus in writing to the Beit Din, or does he have to come and be present and can only be aid while he speaks in front of the Beit Din? And this arrives in our sugya in a little complicated area. So we'll begin by learning the sugya and then moving on to this very, very famous Tosfot and the big machloket that many Rishonim had on Rabbeinu Tam in this Tosfot. And we're aiming to learn also what it means, the Isur of mipihem velo mipi ktavam. So let's get into the sugya and then move on to the Tosfot. The sugya starts with a very interesting Mishnah that already started in the Daf Lamed that speaks about all kinds of speikos that you have in Kiddushim and Gerushin. Why are we speaking about speikot in Kiddushim and Kiddushim? Because if a woman is safek megureshet or safek mekudeshet, of course that will change the status of the Yavama. So the Gemara, the Mishnah first tells us what kind of speikot we might have in Kiddushim and Gerushin. Let's read the Mishnah. Mishnah in Daf Lamed Amud Bet. מתניתין, וכולן שהיו בהן קידושין או גירושין בספק, הרי אלו הצהרות חולצות ולא מתייבמות. If there's a suffix in the Kiddushim or Gerushin, the woman is safek megureshet, then she cannot be mityabemet, she can only be choletzet, because you don't really know if she's the wife of the dead brother. Ketzad safek kiddushin. How do you have safek in kiddushin? זרק לה קידושין, ספק קרוב לו, ספק קרוב לה, זהו ספק קידושין. ספק גירושין, כתב בכתב ידו ואין עליו עדים, יש עליו עדים ואין בו זמן, יש בו זמן ואין בו אלא עד אחד, זהו ספק גירושין. So, to explain what is safek kiddushin, the Mishnah gives an example of somebody who throws kesef kiddushin or shtar kiddushin to a woman and she has to accept it, but it's unclear if it's in her territory or in his territory. It's a safek. That's safek kiddushin. Safek gerushin, if there's a get that's written in the handwriting of the man, but there are no edim in that get, it's a safek. And if there are edim, but there is no time in the get, that's a safek. If there is time, but it's only one aid, it's also a safek. These are questions in gerushin that we will learn Bezrat Hashem in Gitin. This Mishnah causes a problem because the first example of safek kiddushin is also relevant for safek gerushin, and it looks as if the problems that are in gerushim and written in the writing of shtar getin might be also problematic in shtar kiddushin. Why does the Mishnah give examples that are for both areas, but only claims that they're relevant to one area? And that's what the Gemara asks. The first example of the safek kiddushin, it's also relevant for safek gerushin. Why didn't the Mishnah say that the first safek is a safek in kiddushim and in gerushin? To answer this question, why is the Mishnah written the way it's written, we have two main answers. The first answer is Rabba's answer that you've already learned to the Daf Lamed, and we want to move on to Daf Lamed Aleph, and there Abaye gives a different answer because Rabba's answer has problems. What is Abaye's answer? Why did the Mishnah give an example that's relevant both to Gerushin and Kiddushin, but only said that it's relevant to Kiddushin? Says Abaye, Ela Amar Abaye Yagid Alav Re'u. What does Abaye say? Yagid Alav Re'u, Tana beKiddushin Vu'ar Din leGerushin. Abaye says it's true that the Mishnah says that it's only regarding Kiddushin, but the Mishnah isn't serious. When the Mishnah says Kiddushin, she means it's also relevant to Gerushin. Why? Because Kiddushin and Gerushin are like brothers. They're connected. So anything that's problematic in Kiddushin is also problematic in Gerushin. Rava asks Abaye a simple question. Amar le Rava, Yagid alav re'o, ma izdeu de katane. Rava says, when we read the Mishnah, it doesn't sound as if when we're saying Kiddushin, we also mean Gerushin. When we say Gerushin, we also mean Kiddushin. Why? Because there's a very small word appearing in the Reisha of the Mishnah and in the Seifa. Zehu safek shebekiddushin. When we say zehu safek, we say this is a safek only in kiddushin. So how could it be that the usage of the word kiddushin is also relevant to gerushin? It doesn't sound that way because of this word zehu. So Rava wants to give a different answer, but it's not very different from Abaye. He's taking the idea of Abaye and promoting it a little. אלא אמר רבא, כל שיש בקידושין יש בגירושין, ויש בגירושין מה שאין בקידושין. וזהו דגירושין לאו דווקא, אלא משום דתנא זהו בקידושין, תנא נמי זהו בגירושין. וזהו דקידושין למהותי מים. למהותי זמן, דליקה בקידושין. Says Rava, as a matter of fact, the first example of the Mishnah is relevant also to Gerushin. So why did the Mishnah say Zehu? Because the Mishnah wants to tell you that there is a long list here, right? There was a first example, but 3 other examples in Gitin. And the Mishnah is telling you not all of the examples are relevant to Kiddushin. All of the examples are relevant to Gerushin, but Kiddushin, not all of the examples are relevant. Which example is not relevant for Kiddushin? The problem of no Zman. If there's no Zman in a get, it's a get pasul. But if there's no Zman in a shtar Kiddushin, that shtar is fine. Okay, now we're interested. Why? Why is the need to have Zman only in shtar Gitin and not in shtar Gerushin? To understand this question, let's just explain more what it means, the need for time. When you write a get, you have to have the date of the get written in the get itself. If you won't have the date, you won't have the time that the get was given, then this get will be a get pasul. Is it not a get from the Deraita? No, it's only from the Rabbanan, but we will learn that in Gitin. Anyway, there's a takan of Chachamim that you have to have time. But if you're writing shtar Kiddushin, which is something very rare, we don't really do it today. We usually do Kiddushei Kesef, not Kiddushei Shtar. But if you do Kiddushei Shtar, you don't have the right time. If there's no time, it's fine. Kiddushin are fine. There's no takana of Zman in Kiddushin. Why is that? The Gemara explains. ומפני מה לא תקנו זמן בקידושין. הניחא למאן דאמר משום פרא ארוסה לית לפרא, אלא למאן דאמר משום בת אחותו להתקין זמן. Okay, this is just one sentence, but it has a lot of sugyot inside a sentence. Rashi here in the daf explains to you what's written here. So in order to understand the sentence, we need to know a bit of Masachet Gitin. In Masachet Gitin, there's a machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Why did Chachamim do this takana? Why did Chachamim require to have time and get? And if you don't have time and get, it is pasul midirabbanan. Why? Rabbi Yochanan says mishum bat achoto, and Reish Lakish says mishum perot. The Gemara here says that according to Reish Lakish, we understand very well why this takana is only in Gitin and not in Gerushin. It is only in Gerushin and not in Kiddushin. But according to Rabbi Yochanan's explanation, bat achoto, we have a problem. So let's begin by understanding Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish, as the Gemara says, doesn't have a problem. And he's the easier shita here. So let's begin from him. What is perot? What is the takana of perot? So Rashi explains what I'll tell you. I'm really paraphrasing Rashi. That always helps us in these sugyas. Rashi explains the following. When a woman marries a man, in the time of the Mishnah, the woman would bring in sometimes, not always, if she had her own money and her own land, she would bring in the land into the marriage. Now, when she marries with a man, it doesn't mean that the land belongs to the man. No, if they divorce, the land will return to the woman. But all long as they are married, the man has a schus to eat the peiros of the land. Let's give an example. Let's say I have land. It's a land of wheat. Wheat grows in my land. So my husband can use the wheat every year. And if we divorce, the land will return to me. But I am giving him the right to eat from the land, the period of the land. When does he have this right, and why does he have his right? You learn that in Ketubah. In Ketubah, we see that man has all kinds of obligations towards his wife. One of them is if she is kidnapped, he has to pay ransom for her. And since she doesn't have money of her own, and he has to pay her ransom, so he's given schut to eat the payroll of her land. Because when you get married, it's not only about romance, it's also about money. And here, if you want to have the woman coverage by her husband, so she's it's as if he's it's like a bituach. It's like when how do you say this in English? It's like insurance. Okay, the woman's sort of paying insurance for the man, so he will save her and pay for her in case of a problem. So he gets the right to eat from the land. When is the husband obligated in paying ransom for his wife? So this is very interesting. Only after they're married, not after they're mekudash. Kiddushin is a stage before marriage, and if a man is mekadesh in isha, he's not chayav to pay her ransom, and therefore he's not. He can't use the parrot from her land. Only after they marry under the chuppah, then this relationship takes place. Therefore, it is very clear why we don't need time and get for time in Shtar Kiddushin. Shtar Kiddushin is only for Kiddushin. It's not for Nisuin. Nisuin is under the chuppah. And even if somebody gives a Shtar Kiddushin, it doesn't make any difference when it comes to whether or not he can eat from the fruit of the land. So therefore, we're not interested in when these Kiddushin take place because it has no ramifications on the zchuyot of the husband. However, the time of the get has a lot to say about whether or not the husband can eat perot. It is true that writing a get doesn't mean the woman is divorced. In order for a woman to divorce, first the get has to be written and then it has to be given in her hand. So you might have a situation that a get is written and still the gerushin did not take place. But, says Rashi, we learn in Masechet Gitin that if a man decided to divorce his wife and went to the extent of writing a get that is called Natan Enav Legarsha, he can no longer eat from the parrot of her land because he doesn't really want to live with her anymore. And therefore, the date of the time when the get is written, that is when he can no longer eat from her parrot. So we might have a lawsuit that a woman claims he wrote the get 2 years ago. It's true, I only got it now, but I want my money back because he was still eating from my land. And the husband will say, no, I only wrote this get recently, and when I ate the parrot from the land, it was pereshut. So that's why we need to know when this get was written, not only when it was given, but when it was written, because if the man decided to be Makarish's wife, he can no longer eat from the parrot from her land. So that's why, says the Gemara, for Reish Lakish, it makes perfect sense. But it's the kind of would be in Gittin and not in Kiddushin, because in Kiddushin the time does not make any difference for parrot, and in Gittin it makes the whole difference when the get was written. So Reish Lakish works fine with first sugya. But how about Rabbi Yochanan? According to Rabbi Yochanan, why do we need time and get? Because when a man marries a woman, even if it's only mekadesh her, she is usher on the entire world. And therefore, if she had sexual intercourse with somebody, mezana, she is chayav mita. Says Rabbi Yochanan, sometimes you marry somebody who you're connected to, not because you married. For example, your cousin, your achyanit, the daughter of your sister. If you marry her, bat achoto, you want to save her from death. So even if she actually was mezana, you will try to change things in order to have her cleared from death punishment. How will you do that? If you have Adim coming and saying, this woman was mezana at a certain date, you will say, oh, but we weren't married. Why? Because I already divorced her before this edus. Or if they say that she was mezana before they were while they were married, he will say, well, I only married her later. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, also in marriage, Kiddushin, and also in Gittin, a man will want to change the date on the star because he will want to say that this edut is not relevant for this woman and therefore save her from death punishments. Mechape al bat achutu. So maybe Rabbi Yochanan is wrong. Maybe Reish Lakish is proven right from our sugya. No, sugya says no. Also, we can understand Rabbi Yochanan, even though Rabbi Yochanan thinks that the reason you have time is in order to prevent from a man to make believe that he did not marry this woman at the right time, and therefore she's cleared from the punishment of death penalty. It is still understandable why this is only in Gittin and not in Kiddushin. Why? We have two answers. First answer, Rav Acha ber Rav Ika says, the first answer, Mishum de Ika de Mekadesh bekaspa, ve'ika de Mekadesh b'shtara, lo tikun Rabbanan zman. What's this answer? Gittin, there's only one way to do. You have to give a get. Therefore, Chachamim did this takana of zman to prevent a situation that a man or a woman claimed that they were not married when the sin took place. But most people, or at least you can choose if you're married by shtar or if you're married by kesef. You don't have to be mekadesh by shtar. You can also be mekadesh by kesef. Bia, even though it's a possibility, Chachamim said you can't do it. But kesef and shtar are two legitimate ways. Therefore, Chachamim did not do a takana in the shtar of Kiddushin because they know that many people will be doing kesef Kiddushin, and therefore this takana will not really change anything. Rav Acha ber Rav Ika asks Rav Ashi and says, this is not a very good answer. Why? Because there is a different get, a gitei avadim, and also a shtar of kinyan eved. When you buy an eved, you can also buy an eved either in kesef or in shtar. And still, their chachamim did do takana zman. So your answer that if you have two ways, either kesef or shtar, and that's why chachamim did not do a takana is not true. Obviously, we have another place that they did do this takana of zman. Not only gittin, also shtar of avadim. Answers Rav Ashi, no. Rav Acha ber Rav Yosef, there's a big difference between avadim and kiddushin. It is true that kiddushim and avadim you can do both in kesef and shtar, but go and see. Avadim are always, almost everybody gets an eved with a shtar, and kiddushin, almost everybody does it with kesef. I've been in many weddings. What I saw is kiddushay kesef, not kiddushay shtar, and this seems, according to our Gemara, that is already the case in the time of the Gemara. So that's the first answer for Rav Acha ber Rav Yosef's question. Another answer, maybe this is not the reason why Chachamim did not change the time in shtar kiddushin. What is the true reason? Mishum de efshar. Because it's not possible. Why isn't it possible? It's takanat zman. Fine. Hechi li'avi, says the Gemara. The shtar of kiddushin is held by somebody to prove the kiddushin. Who are these people? Hechi li'avid. Linche gabe didei machkale. Linche gabe dida זימנין בת אחותו היא מחפה עליה. לנחה גבי עדים, אידי זכירי ליתו ליסוד, ואילו זימנין דחסו מכתבה ואתו מעשדי ברחמנה אמר, מפיהם ולא מפי כתבה. Says the Gemara, if the problem is that a woman will want to say that she was not married when Adim come and say that she committed adultery, where will the shtar be? Let's say the time is written in the shtar, but if the woman is holding her shtar kiddushin, she will just cut off the time or maybe erase the time. So even if you do takanat zman, it won't help you because she will change the time in the shtar. And if it's with her husband, sometimes the husband married his bat achoto, and then he will want to change the shtar. Okay, so let's give this shtar of kiddushin to an objective party, the Eidim, which are chatumim on the shtar. Here, says the Gemara, there's another problem. What's the problem with having the Eidim hold the shtar? The Gemara says we don't want the Eidim to hold the shtar. Why? Because sometimes the Eidim don't remember what happened. There are two people who are coming and saying this woman committed adultery. The Adim can come and say, yes, she did, because we know the date that the marriage took place. Or they say, no, this is not adultery because we know she was married later. That's if they remember. But if they don't remember and they have the star, sometimes they won't remember and they'll look at the star and then they'll come and give edus while they're looking at the star, and that's not real edus because they're not allowed to give edus if they don't remember. And Rahmana said, "Mipihem velo mipi ktavam," so they cannot be me'idim on according to the star. So here we reached where our Tosfot pops in. We have a very interesting statement here in the Gemara. Eidim can only be me'idim on something if they remember it on their own. If they don't remember, and if they're looking at a star, and then they're being me'idim according to the star, that edud is pasul, because God said, "Mipihem velo mipi ktavam," they have, when they're eidim, they have to speak and not to write. So this statement in the Sugya caused a lot of trouble in the Rishonim. Big questions. The first question is, we thought that shtarot are something that do come to Beit. And here in the Sugya, it sounds as if you can't use shtar in Beit because you have to have your edus ba'al peh. How could that be? We know that there are shtarot in the world. The Tosfot here asks this question a little differently. The Baal Tosfot here is Ri, and he asks a slightly different question and gives an interesting answer. So let's move on to the Tosfot after we understood the whole place of the statement in the Sugya. The Ri asks the following, Tosfot Dibor Matchil Dechaz. Kashe Leri. Ri has a problem. De בהגוזל כמה, בבא כמה דף צדיק ח' גבי השורף שטרותיו של חברו פריך. וידעיקה סהדה דידי לכתבו להשטר האחרינה. ואמי, המרחה דמפיהם ולא מפי כתבם. Says the Ri, as usual, like the Tosfot do, I have a problem with this sugya because I have another sugya that's contradicting it. This sugya sounds that Eidim cannot do an Eidud if they read something in shtar and don't remember it. But there's another sugya in Baba Kama that says that if somebody burnt my shtarot, if there are people who saw these shtarot, Eidim that saw the shtar, lichtu v'lei shtar achrina, they can create a new shtar. Says we, how could that be? We just learned that you cannot be ma'id from the shtar. So if people saw a shtar, they didn't hear somebody say, the shtar did not talk to them, so they cannot say what was in the shtar. They can't be ma'id on something that's written. The sugya here says that you can't be ma'id on something that's written. Mipihem velo mipi ktavam. So in Baba Kama, this rule does not exist. And here in Yavamot it does exist. How will we read these two sugyot together? Because Tosfot wants the sugyot to work together. They cannot be contradicting in such a high level. It's a very, very good question, of course, the question of the Ri. So the Ri here gives answers. Let's see. What are the answers of the Ri? Omer Ari, דאחי נמי. אם היו מעידים שכך ראו בשטר, שפיר אהבו עבדי. והרי הם כאילו מעידים, ראינו עדות שנתקבל בביתי. העדים החתומים על השטר נעשה כמי שנחקרה עדותם בביתי. אבל חיישינן, שמא לא יעידו שכך ראו בשטר, אלא שמא יעידו על המעשה עצמו, כאילו הם זוכרים והם אינם זוכרים על פי הכתב. Says you have to read our sugya and Yevamot differently. First, Yael, you must understand. If you saw a star, you can then write it again. I'll explain what the Ri means. Let's say I did not see anything. I did not see the Kiddushin, I did not see the Gerushin, I did not see the Mecher, I did not see anything. I just go to my friend's house and I saw the star. I never claimed to know what actually happened there, but all I can claim is that I know he had a star with these details. The Ri says that's fine. You can rewrite that star if you know that you saw the star. Why? Because the star is like an edus that Beit Din accepted. And any edus that Beit Din accepted, other people who were in the Beit Din say, we were in this Beit Din and we saw these edus say something to Beit Din, and Beit Din said this is a right edus. So when I say that I saw a star, I'm doing the same thing. Where is it problematic? If I'm the same aid that was in the situation, like here in Yevamot, you have the aidim of the Kiddushim who wrote the star, being ma'idim on the star. There you have a problem. Why, says Reed? Because if they would say, I had the star, bring the star, that would be fine. But the aidim that were actually there might be doing something that is asur, according to halach. What's asur? The aidim can't come and be ma'idim. I remember this if they don't really remember it. You can either bring to Beit Din a star, you can really remember the situation. And what will happen to these aidim that were there and they have a star? They might do something that is asur. They won't bring the star over. They'll come themselves and they will claim that they remember the situation, but they don't really remember. They read it from the star, and that is edut basul. So because of that, here in Yevamot, you're not allowed to do it and to give it to the aidim, because these aidim that you give them the star are the aidim that actually were there in the first place. But in Baba Kama, you're talking about somebody who was never there. He only claims to have seen the written star, the written note, and therefore he can recreate this note on his own. This answer of the Reed is a little complicated, but it also helps us to understand what is the difference between shtar and edut biktav according to Reed. The Reed continues and also tells us that there are other places that aidim can use written stuff that they wrote to themselves. So the first place that aidim can use written things is if I was not there, but I know that I saw a note and I remember what was written in the note, I can definitely recreate this note. That's the first answer of the Reed. The second thing the Reed says regards a different sugya in Ketubot. Let's read it. וכן הדאמרינן בפרק ב' לכתובות. כותב אדם עדותו על השטר, ומעיד עליה אפילו אחר כמה שנים, והוא שזוכרה מעצמו, אבל אין זוכרה מעצמו לו. התמנע מאיירי ומעיד שכך ראה, כתוב, אלא במעיד על מעשה עצמו. ועוד דעתם לא היה שטר, אלא שכותב לזכרון דברים בעלמא, ולא שייך למימר נעשה כמי שנחקרה עדותם בבית. Says the Reed, if I was an aid in a situation, I cannot be ma'id if I don't remember it myself, but I can write notes to myself and help these notes refresh my memory. So an aid, if I saw a situation, I can write notes for myself. But when I come to Beit Din, I must make sure that my real memory is invoked and I'm actually being ma'id because I remember it, not because I wrote it down. So that's another place where aidim can use ktav. They cannot bring ktav to Beit Din. To Beit Din, you can bring a shtar. You cannot bring a ktav to Beit Din, according to the Reed. But you can use written text to help you remember on your own what happened. So first of all, we hear from the Reed that mepihem v'lo piktavam is something that does not mean that written text will not be part of aidim's life. If it's a shtar, of course it is, because the Beit Din itself gave power to the shtar. And if it's a written text, it can help aidim to remember. But they must be 100% sure that they're talking from memory and not from written text. After all of this, the Reed brings a shita of Rabbeinu Tam, which is very famous and very exciting and in a big machloket of the Rishonim. So let's move to the last part of the Tosfot, which is where I really wanted us to reach. ואומר לי, ושמע מרבנו תם, שנוהגים עכשיו ששולחים העדים עדותם בכתב ידם לבית דין, ולא קרין על בי מפיהם ולא מפי כתבם. The Reed says that he heard from Rabbeinu Tam that he thinks that edut can also be sent written to Beit Din, and there's no problem in writing your edut and sending it to Beit Din, and there's no problem with mipiem v'lo mipik tavam. How can that be? How can Rabbeinu Tam say this after the sugya and what Reed said? We think that if you're an aid, you have to remember and come and speak to Beit Din. How can Rabbeinu Tam say that you can send text to Beit Din and that will be considered aids? Rabbeinu Tam asks a question on himself and answers. What is Rabbeinu Tam's question? What is his answer? It has to do with Gitin. In Gitin, there is a Breita. Let's read. V'had Tanya b'misha achazo in daf ayin aleph in Gitin. ואם לא יגיד פרט לאילם שאינו יכול לדבר, הוא פריך ואימי, והרי יכול לדבר מתוך הכתב. שענה עדות, רחמן אמר, מפיהם ולא מפי כתבם. That's the kushya on Rabbeinu Tam. There is a sugya in Gitin that says that if a person cannot talk, he cannot write to Beitin. Why? Asked the sugya. He can communicate. He can communicate. If he can't communicate by speech, he'll communicate by writing. He's in front of Beitin. He can give them writing. He will write down what he has in his head. The sugya says no, he can't do that. Why? Because God said, so this looks as if it's contradicting Rabbeinu Tam directly. There is a Mepharash sugya that says that a person cannot speak, cannot be an aid. Says Rabbeinu Tam. No. You have to understand that sugya is talking about a person who cannot talk at all. If you cannot talk, if you're an Elam, then you cannot be an aid. But if you can talk, you can send your tav to Beitin. Why? כדאמרינן במנחות כל שאינו ראוי לבילה, אבל אחר מועיל כתב ידו שזוכר העדות. Rabbeinu Tam says, if you can talk, you don't have to really talk in front of it. You can also send your written text. If you can't talk, even written text you cannot send. We'll try to understand the idea behind Rabbeinu Tam in a minute. But first, let's just finish the Tosfot. ומיהו, says the Tosfot, בפירוש חומש דברים, פירש רש"י על פי שניים עדים, פרט שלא ישלחו כתבם לבית. So here we have a very big machloket between Rashi and many other Rishonim that think that an aid cannot send written text to Beit. He can send a star, but if he wants to be made, he can't write down his edus. He has to come physically and speak be'al peh to the Beit. Rabbeinu Tam has a very special shita that he thinks that if you can talk, you can also send your writing to Beitin. You don't have to come physically to Beitin. You don't have to talk to Beitin. You can also write. If you cannot talk, then, and only then, you're not allowed to be an aid, not even in writing. That's a huge machloket. How can we understand Rabbeinu Tam? So first I must tell you, remember this Rabbeinu Tam, and you should know that there are many, many different explanations to why Rabbeinu Tam says this. I'll offer one explanation so we'll have something in our head, but this is really a sugya b'iyun that has to be learned. I'll try to explain Rabbeinu Tam the following. If I can talk, I can be an aid. Why? Because an aid is not only information. Beit Din wants to speak to the aid to see if the aid is speaking the truth. And the best way to know if a person is speaking the truth is to meet him face to face and to listen to him talk. If a person writes, writing is a way that you can definitely hide your feelings, your emotions, and many nuances. And by writing, Beit Din won't be able to really make a right decision if you're speaking the truth or not. So according to this Savara, the other Rishonim are right, Rashi's right. Always an aid will have to come to Beit Din. But Rabbeinu Tam might be saying this. If a person knows that Beit Din can call him over, and he knows that Beit Din, if they feel a need, they will call him and interrogate him, that's enough for him to fear that interrogation, and when he writes, he will write the truth, and that's why he can send his written text to Beit Din. And Beit Din, if they feel that there's a problem, will send for him and interrogate him. But many times, Beit Din will feel everything is fine. But if a person cannot speak at all, and Beit Din will never be able to interrogate him, therefore he cannot be an aid because there is no chance that Beit Din can try to find out if he speaks the truth or not by really connecting to him face to face. I must add that maybe nowadays that there is sign language. Sign language might be a good way to be like be'al peh and not bichtav. So this might not be relevant to people who cannot speak today. That was just one way to understand Rabbeinu Tam. So I'll sum up what we saw. We used the Gefet of today to see a very, very famous Tosfot. What's famous in the Tosfot is the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam that thinks that not only there is no problem in Shtar from PM Belon Tiktavam, also a person who wants to be an aid can send written text to Beit Din and it will be accepted by Beit Din. Why? Because this issue of PM Belon Tiktavam is only if you cannot speak at all. But if you can speak, you can send your text to Beit Din. And as we said, many Rishonim are cholek on Rabbeinu Tam, but this Rabbeinu Tam is actually quoted in Shulchan Aruch along other Rishonim, and it's still part of the interplay of halacha further on in the Shulchan Aruch. So you really, it was very important for me that you won't miss this very, very famous and interesting Tosfot. And Bezrat Hashem, when we learn other sugiyot regarding Edus, the sugiyot and Babakama and sugiyot and Gittin, this Tosfot will also help us in the future. So I hope you enjoyed the Gefet today and your learning of Yevamot, and we will meet again Bezrat Hashem next week. Take care.